Okay, so where we last left off, let's go over to the motor for a minute. We buttoned up some last little details. Still obviously not all the way assembled, but we got our front cover on. We installed our glow plugs. You guys saw from the last video the majority of the assembly of a little more than the long block on this thing. But we're gonna jump over to clutch and transmission. So a couple things. This is the 5-speed gearbox. I believe it's called the ALH transmission, or no, the OJ2. Either way, ALH is the motor. This is the 5-speed gearbox that comes with the TDI. It's in good shape. It was dirty. We pressure washed the hell out of it. It's about as clean as it's gonna get. But we're doing the basic maintenance on it, right? Once it's out, we might as well. So a couple things we got new with our clutch set. One of the first things we're gonna go over is new throwout bearing. If you're already this deep into it, you might as well put in a new throwout bearing. So we can go over real quick. I'm sure you guys are familiar, but just super simple how this works. Throwout bearing goes in the clutch fork. There's a retaining spring down here that holds it on this pivot. And then this right here is your hydraulic slave cylinder, okay? This is what actuates your clutch. So to hold it all together, there's really not much. This snaps in just like this, okay? Now you can see the throwout bearing's got that pivot right on that axis. And then to hold the clutch fork on the pivot, there's just this little spring. That's it. So, excuse me, this little tab down here, spring loops on like that, then it snaps through there. And then when you pop that on, that little pivot ball, that pivot point, it should hold it all in there. Simple as that. That's it. So now we got our throwout bearing in. That's pretty much all we're doing with the transmission. It wasn't leaking out of any of the seals. For the sake of keeping the budget as reasonable as possible, this thing didn't give us any problems before, so we're not going to dig too deep into it. So for all intents and purposes, we got our S&P mount on, transmission pretty close to ready to go in the car. So now we can go over our clutch setup. This is from S&P. This clutch is rated almost 100 foot-pounds more than what this TDI motor puts out stock. That should be perfect for what we're doing, because we're running an EGR delete, bigger intercooler, and the computer and the wiring harness are out at S&P for a tune, and for them to go through the wiring harness. They're the experts, so we're gonna let them handle it. So anyways, for our clutch kit, single mass flywheel. This is definitely what you're gonna want with an engine swap. It's more probably used to what most people are used to driving and the feel of it. Single mass flywheel. It's nice. Comes with new supplied bolts with a little thread locker on it. Next, our friction plate, our clutch plate. Like I said, this all comes from a kit from S&P and the new clutch. So all we're going to be doing now in this video is we're going to get this guy off the engine stand. We're going to sling it up on a chain, and then I'm going to go over what it takes to put in a clutch. If you guys have never done this before with the clutch kit, you're going to get a clutch lineup tool. This is super critical. When we're tightening the clutch, this clutch lineup tool has to slide in and out of the splines easily while we're tightening these 6 bolts around the perimeter. If we torque them unevenly, it'll cause it to bind, okay? See that little bit of movement? The transmission input shaft, it's not gonna wanna engage these splines. So we'll go over that later on in the video, but that's just something I wanted to cover if you guys haven't done it. So next, we'll get this thing off the engine hoist up on a chain, and then we'll go over how to install the rest of this. Okay guys, so when we're putting a clutch on and a flywheel, something important that I think sometimes people overlook, you want to make sure your crank flange where your flywheel mounts is clean and there's no obstructions. It's nice and flat, no burrs. And here's why. if your flywheel, if there's something behind it and when it rotates, it wobbles, you're gonna have bad clutch chatter. So there's all types of things that can contribute to clutch chatter, but that's definitely one of them. You wanna make sure the surface is clean and flat. If it's not, you're bound to run into problems. So first things first, when we're putting on our clutch, we are gonna put on our flywheel. So like I said, from S&P, we got the supplied flywheel bolts. That's nice. They come with thread locker already on them, which is excellent. There's no orientation on this. There's no locating dowel, no nothing. But what you will notice is it doesn't have a symmetric pattern. So even though there's no locating dowel on it, you'll notice this flywheel only goes one way. And there you go. Okay, so our 6 supplied bolts. Now, when we put this in, same as kind of installing anything similar when it comes to engine components. We're going to torque it or tighten it and torque it in an alternating pattern. We'll get these all buttoned up and then we'll show you guys the torque sequence for it. With the friction plate in the clutch pack, something that's super critical. Another thing, we talked about the crank flange being clean and free from any burrs or obstruction. You also want to keep oily, greasy handprints, fingerprints off the two machine surface. This relies on friction to work, so oil is going to kill your clutch. So if you're working with greasy hands, wipe them off. But you want to keep the machine surfaces, like I said, on the flywheel and the clutch as clean as possible. So next up, installing our clutch lineup tool. Comes with nearly every clutch kit you're going to get. It's critical. When we're installing this clutch, we need this tool to slide between the crank output flange and the splines on the clutch. We need it to be able to slide smoothly, and the reason for it is we need to keep all of these round parts all stacked in a row on the same axis. The crank center line, the clutch center line, and the transmission input center line on the axle. So with our clutch lineup tool, you notice has 2 different diameters. One registers in the crank in the back of the output flange, and the other registers on the splines in the clutch. So I'll show you guys how it works, and you'll notice too, it's got this pull ring, right? Lets you pull the clutch out, or the clutch lineup tool in and out very easily. So like I said, we're gonna try to keep our oily mitts off this as much as possible. So now we've got our clutch, our lineup tool. Once we have it on the register, that's it. That's how it sits. Now you'll notice the reason you need this tool, this clutch floats on the inside. This is the only thing holding it right here until the transmission input shaft. Next up, the pressure plate. So on the pressure plate, there's 6 bolts. We didn't talk about it, but I'll go back to it. When I torqued those 6 flywheel bolts, those are torqued to 22 foot-pounds, and then surprisingly, for the smaller bolts on the outside, 25. So again, this clutch has got 6 bolts. You'll notice there's 3 dowels to help locate it. So let's try to find the pattern. I'll pull this back off just to show you, but you've got a lot of options, right? There's multiple patterns, so you might have to do a little clocking to figure out which set of holes you're gonna use. But we realized on this one, the hole's stamped in the edges with the big flange like that, and that. Those are the 6 bolts you're gonna use. So we'll get those bolts installed, and I'm gonna show you guys why this clutch tool is so important. So right now I'm just running them down by hand, and you'll see the plate, see it moving a little bit? You'll see it slowly start to move. I'm just tightening these guys up till they just start to make contact. Okay, so you'll notice the clutch is a little snug, but it's not terrible. Okay, so now if we start jumping around and tightening them evenly, we should still be able to have the clutch tool slide a little bit. Another thing, my error. It does come with a little lube for the clutch tool, but we'll get away with a little WD-40. Should have put that on before. Doesn't take much, it's already plastic, so it already wants to slide. Pretty easy, but we'll just try not to cover everything. So the other thing too is we want to make sure, not too much, we don't want to get it on the friction plate. All right, that's good. So we're going to go around and tighten the clutch. We've got 6 bolts, so we're going to jump around in our pattern. So the way I like to sneak up on this is I like to use a ratchet so you can keep track of it, but I'll literally just go 1 turn, 1 turn, 1 turn, 1 turn, 1 turn, and 1 turn. So if we go back, we're still good. So I'm going to repeat that process of jumping around, and as long as I can still slide the clutch tool in and out, it means my friction plate is still centered and my input shaft or on the transmission is going to line up with my clutch. Alrighty guys, so that was it. If you saw, I went around twice. I kind of snuck up on it. It's 22 foot-pounds for these 12-point fasteners. But that's it, guys. Your clutch tool should slide in and out that simply. That's going to allow us to get the transmission right on. So when we come back, we're going to get all prepped, and then this guy is going on this guy, and then those two going in the car. Alrighty guys, so you saw it didn't take too much effort to get the clutch, or excuse me, the transmission lined up, get it together. Right now, we don't have every transmission bell housing bolt in it, and here's why. They're kind of integrated into the starter bolt. So just to bolt it in, we got our 2 main bolts on top, and then there's some smaller bolts down at the bottom of the pan that we got in. Main thing we want to do today is get the motor off the stand, or excuse me, off the hoist, and back into the car. We can finish up all those final details when it's in there. But for now, this is pretty much it. Everything else we're going to be able to do with the motor in the Caddy. As far as our turbo and exhaust side, we were just going to slap it back on, but we've taken the project too far. So we're going to clean it up, go through the turbo, inspect it, see how good it's looking on the inside, and then we're going to send the cast iron manifold and get it blasted. And I'm going to show you guys a trick, kind of a poor man's ceramic coating. We're going to use liquid graphite to etch the manifolds gray so they don't rust. You can see we got our S&P mounts on here. We got our one side mount, our other side mount, our rear mount, and again there is another mount that goes on up here, but we haven't put the starter in yet. Once we put the starter in, we're going to put in that last forward mount. Alrighty guys, big moment, it's going in. Ooh, another thing I want to point out for you Caddy guys, getting this motor in here was kind of a pain because we had to snake it under one motor mount. I don't know if it wasn't welded from the factory or someone missed it, but this battery tray is just kind of in here. So we're gonna bend this up for now when we put the engine in, but this is gonna get moved. I noticed there's a lot of space back here. Also, we've got space in the back, maybe underneath the bed. I want to get the battery out from the front of the car, try to get the weight balance a little better. It might not seem like much, but if we can move 40 pounds off the nose and move that 40 pounds back behind the motor, every little bit helps. So anyways, just something I thought worth noting, but we're gonna do a remote mount battery, just not up here. Alrighty guys, time to put this thing in. Alrighty guys, so not as smooth sailing as we thought. I've seen from the S&P videos that people have done on previous revisions of this kit, this idler pulley they've taken out. Now S&P has revised their design because their old design used to take up this bolt hole, and guys just weren't running the idler. I don't know, I'm assuming that led to engine problems down the road. So we're gonna come up with a solution for this. You can see there's this cage nut in here floating around to allow for some adjustment. You can see just how close this mount is, right, to this idler. But luckily the center line of the bolt is still below the idler. So we're gonna have to do a little bit of surgery here. We're gonna grind this stamped flange back. We're also gonna cut out this cage nut. It looks like we're just gonna have to do a bolt that's not too much longer and a low profile, probably a nylock nut. So we'll do what's necessary over here. We'll relieve this motor mount a little bit to get some clearance. We'll get this guy back up so I can work on it, and then we'll take another stab at it. Okie dokie. So we found out just how close this S&P mount gets to this roller. Now, like I said before, their old mount came through here. You used to ditch this roller, I guess. Apparently it's an improved design, Rev B. So we had to do a couple things. We had to get rid of the cage nut that was on here, and we had to relieve a lot of this mount. If you can see the difference, that side to the other side. We'll run a low profile nylock nut, and we'll have to make the bolt just cut specifically to length, but it does get pretty close. If you look back here, I don't know if you have enough light. Woo! You can kind of see the cage nut. It's pretty dark, but it's basically a nut on the back side. That square nut that floats in a cage, you can kind of see it moving back and forth. That's too big and bulky. It's going to hit our roller. So on our timing set, on our timing belt. So we're going to make attempt number 2 to get this thing in. Another thing we had to do, had to take off the tins on the front of the motor, the covers. They make it a little easier to sneak past the lower lip on this mount. And there's room to get it on with the motor installed. All right, so motor install, take 2. Alrighty guys, so if you look over here, our mount that we had to clear, you can see how much we had to take off. You can see why down here removing that cage nut was crucial. Yeah, so that bolt is about the right length, but we're gonna run a low profile nylock washer on there, or excuse me, nut. Yeah, we got some stuff we gotta clean up down here. Those are from the belt sander. Now, if you guys saw in that time-lapse video, down there, the cover was hitting just slightly. There's a tool for those of you that do metal fab. A couple different companies make them. This one's by Mk1. This thing's invaluable. This little belt sander gets you out of jams like that. Just had to remove a little bit of material. You can clock it, which is pretty cool. Get the belts on Amazon Prime, get them pretty quick. So, side note, this is a really good tool to have for fabrication. Getting back to it, motor's in, so mission accomplished. Besides that little issue with the mount, this whole thing went in pretty easy, guys. S&P makes some nice stuff. It's nice to see the motor in, not on a stand, not on a cart. So now that we got the motor in and off the floor, over the next couple days, we're just gonna be doing final assembly videos. We're gonna go over plumbing hard lines for fuel. We're gonna do aluminum hard lines and AN fittings. We're gonna go over finishing up the rest of the motor. Now we're running a stock turbo and the stock cast iron manifold. And I think I talked about it in a previous video, I didn't realize this, the turbine side of the turbo is cast into the exhaust manifold. So we want to clean that up. I'm going to take it apart, inspect it. We'll do a little video on that just to make sure everything is up to snuff and we can run it. Other than that, guys, I'm pretty stoked. The engine's in. Looking forward to just cleaning stuff up, getting all the fabricated parts back on it, and then yeah, waiting on S&P apparently our light's running out. We're waiting on S&P. They're getting us back our computer with our new tune for the EGR delete and all the other stuff, and they're handling our wiring harness. So we're gonna handle as much as we can between now and then, and hopefully we're ready to go by the time that stuff shows up, and then add fuel, hook it up, and we should be driving.